The Mutant Menace precon has got the wise Mothman as the face commander, with the Master Transcendent as the secondary commander, not to be confused with any of the 4 Doctor Who creatures titled the Master. We'll dive into those 2 commanders and the deck at large in a bit, but right now it's time to talk dollar signs. Is this deck worth the asking price? Talking purely about cold hard cash, my answer is yes. Tack on the dozens of new spells and the complete reskin of cards we've seen before, and my answer is yes, Queen. The new Cultivate art is straight up one of my favorite combined art and flavor texts in recent memory. The price of the deck seems to be hovering anywhere from $55 to $60 between game stores and online. 9 of the reprints cover almost $50 of that total. Speaking of, what are the best reprints? These fall into 2 categories, enchantments and lands. Ripping right out of the gate, we've got Inexorable Tide. This 3 and 2 blue enchantment makes you proliferate whenever you cast a spell. At the time of recording, the cheapest non-Fallout version of this spell was nearly $14. If you're doing counter things, passively boosting the total of your +1/+1, or loyalty, or poison counters with this enchantment is gonna do wonders. Guardian Project is also found in the deck, costing roughly $10. The 3 and a green enchantment is a natural in the commander format, thriving on the 1 of each card rule. Essentially, this works out as Guardian Project, drawing you a card every time a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control. If you can make this enchantment stick around, we're talking a lot of cards. Branching Evolution is a 2 and a green enchantment and costs roughly $9. If you were to put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature, that amount gets doubled. Rather than Cathedral Acolyte putting 1 counter on a creature, that'll be 2. Rather than Bloatfly Swarm entering the battlefield with 5 counters, that'll be 10. The high value land here is Nesting Grounds at just under $6. It taps for a colorless, which is probably fair given its second ability. At sorcery speed, it lets you pay 1 mana to tap it, to move any counter from 1 target permanent you control to any other permanent. This has an infinite turn combo combined with Magosi the Waterveil and Karn's Bastion, for instance. It's most commonly found in Saga decks or commanders that utilize specialized counters. In combination with that Branching Evolution we just talked about, or Hardened Scales, which is also in the deck, this will surely provide some value. There are 2 Tainted lands that only tap for a color when you control a swamp. Tainted Isle and Tainted Wood total out to around $2. Lastly, there are 3 check lands that enter tapped unless you control a basic land type of a color that they tap for. Hinterland Harbor, Woodland Cemetery, and Drowned Catacomb altogether total out to over $7. Quick second, if you don't want the real world to look like the Fallout world, you gotta subscribe to the channel right here and right now. Which commander is better? In a battle of precons, the wise Mothman is the clear frontrunner, synergizing with most components of the deck, namely the rad counters he applies and the +1/+1 counters he distributes. Once you start scaling up the power, the Master Transcendent takes over as a combo machine through his tap ability that reanimates a creature milled this turn. The idea is that the turn you cast the Master, you apply the rad counters to yourself, followed up with a top-of-the-library tutor like Worldly Tutor. On the following turn, the rad counters will mill that creature into the graveyard, so the Master can tap to reanimate it. The most thematic combo is the food chain with Mist Hollow Griffin Victory, creating infinite mana, allowing you to infinitely cast the Master, applying infinite rad counters to each of your opponents. The Mothman can do this one as well, but it's more mana intensive, and the Master can leverage his tap ability to do Thoracle things as well. How does the deck win? Returning back to the precon, this deck has 3 main components. The first is +1/+1 counters with spells that enter or can gain counters, multiply those counters, and leverage those counters for additional value. The second is rad counters, which are applied to players. These force a player to mill cards equal to the number of rad counters at the beginning of their pre-combat main phase, losing 1 rad counter and 1 life for each non-land card milled this way. Besides the damage this will deal to your opponents, there are ways to use these to your advantage as well. The Screeching Scorchbeast will turn those milled non-land cards into zombies. Nightkin Ambusher is unblockable when attacking a radiated opponent, and Strong, the Brutish Thespian, turns the life loss for you into life gain. The last component is Proliferation, accelerating each of the previous elements. The way the deck wins will generally be through combat after layering on too many counters for your opponents to handle, primarily on the 10 creatures that have flying or trample. Other possibilities include getting really wide with the Watchful Radstag's Evolve ability, applying lethal amounts of radiation with Feral Ghoul's Death Trigger, giving flight to otherwise landbound creatures with Jason Glowing Prophet, or ruling over the ashes after causing a nuclear fallout. Finally, a victory through commander damage is always on the table with the Wise Mothman, as he's a flyer that grows in strength. What's the best new card? I'm gonna avoid the spells I talked about in the Monocolor Fallout series that you can find in the card above, and go with Mutational Advantage. The 1 green and blue instant is a protection spell that grants every permanent you control with a counter hexproof and indestructible until the end of the turn. It also prevents any damage that would have been dealt to said permanents and proliferates on top of it. This won't be the next Ripples of Potential, now a $16 spell, given its higher end 2-color mana cost, but it does offer a conditional benefit that Ripples is missing out on. Plainly, Mutational Advantage leaves your creatures in the game to line up favorable blocks, stick around to keep blocking after you pass your turn, or even help push through lethal amounts of damage. I wouldn't blame you for a second, and it may just be correct, to toss this into every counter deck you have with Simic colors. What is my favorite new card? I'm gonna break the rule I just made, because not only is Tato Farmer my favorite card in this deck, but the whole set. It's hard not to root for an honest zombie peasant doing his best to manage his homestead. Its abilities aren't half bad either. You can give yourself rad counters with the landfall trigger, and then you can tap him to harvest, or put a freshly milled land from any graveyard onto the battlefield tapped and under your control. You know what they say, give me a Tato and I'll eat for a day. Teach me to Tato and I'll get radiation poisoning. What's the best non-land addition? Benevolent Hydra is my spell of choice here, with a wall of text that I promise is all good things. It'll enter with X +1/+1 counters, the X relating to the amount of mana spent. When a +1/+1 counter is put on another creature you control, it'll receive an additional +1/+1 counter. Then you can tap it to transfer a +1/+1 counter from the Hydra to another creature you control. Combined with the second ability, that'll be 2 counters. All of these work great in the deck, but the tap ability puts this one over the edge for me. Being able to use this at instant speed can set up some cheeky combat tricks to surprise your opponents. More than that, this is another piece that can get counters on creatures that don't have them. Big evasive threats like Lumbering Megasloth and Agent Frank Horrigan have the counter payoffs, but no counters themselves. The Hydra, gifting those counters to these creatures, set them up for the proliferation subtheme and to deliver maximum hurt. What's the most fun Nonland edition? Rather than bolstering the +1/+1 counter theme, I think it would be the most fun to build around the rad counter theme. When in Rome, you know? For that reason, Blood Chief Ascension is the pick. If an opponent lost 2 or more life at the beginning of each end step, the enchantment gets a quest counter. When it has 3 quest counters, it will start to trigger whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere. The trigger will make that player lose 2 life, and will make you gain 2 life. With 4 players at the table, the quest counters should stack up to 3 really quickly. Once you hit that mark, the radiation damage will evolve from a minor inconvenience to where did my skin go? What's the best budget addition? The card advantage and proliferation instant experimental augury will supplement whichever strategy you opt for, and give you 3 shots to find that spell or land for which you've been looking. Card advantage in this deck is supported, but a good portion of it is conditional. Jason Bright and Marcus could draw you a half a dozen cards, but you also need to be in a position to meet their requirements. Experimental Augury gives you that straightforward benefit with upside on the back end. What's the first cut? Again, no matter which strategy you're optimizing for, Piper Wright, Public Reporter, isn't doing enough to help either of them. Honestly, it feels like they had an extra design idea coming out of Murders at Karlov Manor and slapped it on Piper. In any case, clue tokens are well outside the bounds of what this deck is trying to accomplish, even if they hand out +1/+1 counters when sacrificed. We were able to answer some burning questions about the Mutant Menace precon here, and if you're into these Fallout sets, we did a deep dive into the Hail Caesar precon, including an upgrade package. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video if you liked it, and let me know in the comments how you plan to upgrade this deck. I'll catch you next time for some more monkeying around.